When the new young animator stepped in to take over Disney Animation and carry the legacy from the old masters, they unexpectedly entered at a very hectic and, well, debatably disastrous time for the studio. Not only was there a major corporate shakeup that resulted the Walt Disney Company to have outsiders in charge like Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, but their animated films reached a new low when The Black Cauldron turned out to be an embarrassing box office bomb, and the crew had to move to a rundown facility in Glendale. I think it's safe to say that all the new people were off to a bad start. But soon afterwards, they did gradually improve themselves and their work in order to regain Disney's reputation. Since they were at the bottom, they progressively improved with each movie afterwards, like The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company. At the same time, outside sources were also helping to boost the mainstream popularity of Disney and their animated classics, like the home media market and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It was like everything was set up for Disney Animation to return as the masters of the medium, making it the perfect opportunity for a princess to save Disney when they needed it the most, much like what Snow White and Cinderella did before. And that princess was the Little Mermaid. It's the story of Ariel, one of the daughters of King Triton, who saved and fell in love with a human named Eric, even if she didn't properly introduce herself to him. Since her father disapproved of her new sentiments, she decided to seek the help of the sea witch Ursula to trade her voice for a pair of legs. Now Ariel has to get a kiss of true love from the man of her dreams before time runs out and face the consequences of Ursula's contract. When starting production, some of the people at Disney wondered, why didn't Walt think of doing his own adaptation of the story? I mean, he did define the movie versions of tales from the Brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault. Why not something from Hans Christian Andersen? Actually, he did. It's just that he never made a finished product with one of his stories. After the release of Snow White, Walt considered to make a collaboration with Samuel Goldwyn of MGM in order to make a biopic of Hans Christian Andersen. The plan was to have Goldwyn produce the live-action biographical part of Andersen, while Disney would create animated shorts based on his stories that would be a part of the feature, one of which included The Little Mermaid. However, the plan was ultimately scrapped. Fast forwarding nearly 50 years later in 1985, Ron Clements got the idea of creating a Disney version of the Hans Christian Andersen story. When he proposed it to Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg's Gong Show pitch meeting, the idea got rejected. Nothing against the story, but one of their more recent big hits at the time was the comedy Splash, and they were thinking about developing a sequel, so they weren't really too keen on having another mermaid feature that's kind of doing the same thing. But, like I said, the story wasn't at fault here. In fact, it was actually quite good, which was why Katzenberg changed his mind the next day and approved the project. From there, Clements and one of the directors he worked with on The Great Mouse Detective, John Musker, convinced Jeffery that they were suited to lead the project as directors and writers with a script that even amazed him, which was fueled by their passion to create the grand return of a fairy tale-based Disney animated film since Sleeping Beauty, and inspiration from their discovery of artwork by Kai Nielsen made for Walt's version of the story. While Ron and John were already in place to be the key players to lead the project, it wouldn't be until one more person came along to not only help find the movie's identity, but also refine the format of the future of Disney's animated films. One of Jeffrey's friends, David Geffen, suggested to bring on board Howard Ashman to work at Disney to give his musical touch onto his pictures. Beforehand, Howard was a director, playwright, and lyricist for both on and off Broadway. Early in his career, he found great success in 1982 with his musical Little Shop of Horrors that resulted in several awards and a film version directed by Frank Oz 4 years later. However, after the failure of Smile, he wanted to find an escape from stage musicals, and Jeffery could not have picked a better time to ask for his assistance. When he entered in 1987, he started out by working on the lyrics of Once Upon a Time in New York City and Oliver and Company, But he knew his main job was for The Little Mermaid, and even brought on board his longtime collaborator Alan Menken to work on the score. His purpose was technically to just write the lyrics for the songs, but Ashman's contribution to the feature was actually so big that he could have almost been considered one of the directors, fixing plot points and structuring the story in a similar style to a Broadway production, changing characters to suit the music better, like turning an English crab named Clarence into a Jamaican crustacean called Sebastian, and even with the casting by bringing on board the star of the failed show Smile, Jodie Benson, to voice Ariel. When developing Ursula, there was a wide variety of suggestions of what to do with her design, trying out all shapes and sizes, and mixing her with many different sea creatures. They were close to making her part scorpionfish, but it wasn't until Matthew O'Callaghan suggested that an octopus would suit her best. As for Ursula's human side, she was modeled after renowned drag performer Divine, and while several actresses were considered for the part, including Bea Arthur as the original idea, they ultimately went with Pat Carroll. Actually, there were many actors that were in consideration for some roles, including Bill Maher and Michael Richards as Scuttle, Jim Carrey as Prince Eric, and Melissa Fawn was thought to play Ariel before Benson stepped in. Speaking of Ariel, there were several debates on what would be her hair color. At the time, the most popular choice for pop culture mermaids was blonde, especially when that was used for Splash, so that had to be crossed off to not copy that film. After some deliberation, the team ultimately went with red because it complements Ariel's green fins quite well. As this movie is mostly set underwater, it was the first time for Disney since Pinocchio and Fantasia that they had to use a heavy amount of special effects, especially with the millions of bubbles and the storm scene that also included waves, dramatic lighting, thunder, and fire. Of course, that set a big challenge for the animators, along with the new direction that they had to push in order to produce the best animated film they can make. But if there was one obstacle that was the biggest throughout the production, it was Jeffery Katzenberg. Considering that he was still new to the process of animation, one of Jeffery's faults was that he had no patience, especially if he didn't know if a scene from a storyboard can translate well in the final picture. After one test screening of the unfinished film where children got a little restless during, Katzenberg demanded to cut out the song Part of Your World because of the poor reception it got from kids. The entire crew, including Ron, John, and Howard, begged Jeffery to keep it in, as it was Ariel's big moment to let her heart out to express what she wanted the most. But he reluctantly refused to listen. But then came Glen Keane, one of the supervising animators of Ariel. He advocated the hardest to keep the scene and give it another chance. Somehow, Keane succeeded in convincing Katzenberg, and after another screening, now fully animated and colored, the song ultimately stayed. As the movie was prepared for its big release on November 17, 1989, there was some doubt if all the effort was worth it, since the higher-ups did label it as a girls' film and that those have a higher risk of earning less than expected. But when Ariel finally emerged on the big screen, those doubts were washed off in the most spectacular way possible. Critics and audiences praised the movie as a crowning achievement, especially for its characters, animation, and songs. On top of that, it was also an amazing financial success, earning a domestic gross of $84.4 million. With the combination of its international earnings and the extra from the re-release in 1997, The Little Mermaid made a grand total of $233 million. But Ariel's success did not end there, as The Little Mermaid grew into a billion-dollar franchise. Along with the prominent amount of merchandising, Disney also presented many more of Ariel's adventures, including a series in 1992 that ran for 3 seasons and 31 episodes, a set of cartoons starring Sebastian, 2 direct-to-video features that include a sequel in 2000 called The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea, and a prequel in 2008 called The Little Mermaid: Ariel's Beginning, which the latter was the last direct-to-video follow-up of a Disney animated film made by Disney Toon Studios, and some appearances on The House of Mouse and Kingdom Hearts. There were even special adaptations of the movie, like a Broadway musical that ran from the start of 2008 to the summer of 2009, a live concert presentation at the Hollywood Bowl in 2016 and 2019, and a live televised special that showed both the original movie and live actors play out the musical numbers on stage on November of 2019, in honor of the feature's 30th anniversary. The movie is also highly prominent at the park since the release of the feature, often appearing on parades, meet and greets, shows like Voyage of the Little Mermaid, a dark ride based on the movie called The Little Mermaid, Ariel's Undersea Adventure, and a whole land at Tokyo Disney Sea called Mermaid Lagoon. However, while Ariel was celebrating the glory of her success, there were a few instances where she did get in trouble for, how can I put this?
Snooping as usual, I see.
One was in the original VHS cover, where one of the towers in the castle stands out for being, rock hard, and another was during the wedding scene, where audiences were wondering if that was his knee, or the priest finds either the bride or groom to be really arousing. Either way, both were removed and re-edited for future releases. On the bright side, the movie also got several awards, especially for the music. It won 2 Grammys, and for both the Oscars and Golden Globes, the film won for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for Under the Sea, along with additional nominations like another one in Best Song for Kiss the Girl in both, and Best Picture in the Comedy or Musical category at the Globes. In terms of the Oscars, this makes it the first time that a fully Disney animated movie got nominated since The Rescuers, and the first to win an award since Dumbo. It even made appearances on lists of the greatest animated movies like Time Magazine's 25 all-time best animated films. While it may seem like Disney was just going back to their roots telling classic fairy tale stories starring a princess, the studio took a great risk by reinventing the meaning of what is a Disney animated musical, allowing the new animators to unleash their full potential and inviting more newcomers to give the feature that Broadway touch in order to put on a show like never before. The new team dreamed of the day that they could make a movie that will forever be among the great classics of the wonderful world of Disney. And with The Little Mermaid, that movie can finally be a part of that world. Now that Disney Animation climbed their way back to the top after years of struggle from the new changes, the confidence at the studio was at an all-time high, which was what they needed to try something with their next feature that the company had never done before. A Disney animated sequel with The Rescuers Down Under. At the Rescue Aid Society, Bianca and Bernard were assigned to go to the Australian outback to rescue a boy named Cody, who was kidnapped by Percival C. McLeach, a poacher hunting a rare giant eagle named Marahute. Along with the Society's Australian representative, Jake, the mice set off to save Cody and stop McLeach from getting his hands on the endangered bird. As one of the approved projects from the Gong Show pitch meeting, the production began back in 1986, where animator Mike Gabriel was asked by Peter Schneider to direct. He was hesitant at first after seeing what George Scribner went through during Oliver and Company, but then a few months later, he took the job and got the supervising animator of Tito and Oliver, Hendel Batoy, to co-direct with him. Their biggest goal with the movie was to fully emphasize the action-adventure genre, to take a break from their usual animated musicals and create an intense thrill ride whose looks take inspiration from filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock, David Lean, and Orson Welles. At the same time, Schneider brought on board staff member of the Mark Taper Forum, Thomas Schumacher, to be a producer for the feature. One of the first things he did for the movie was to get story artist Joe Ranft to be the story supervisor. While beloved by his animation peers, he did cause some trouble by arguing with studio management and executives, including one time where he wanted Cody to be an Aboriginal Australian and even be voiced by one, but the plan got scrapped in favor of having the character be just some white blonde boy that they didn't even bother giving him an Australian accent.
Cody? Yeah, Mom? What about your breakfast? I've got some sandwiches in my pack. We'll be out for supper. No worries, Mom.
Speaking of characters, while Disney brought back Bob Newhart and Ava Gabor to reprise their roles, making this the last movie to feature the latter, they unfortunately were too late to get Jim Jordan come back as Orville, since he passed away on April 1988. To work around this, Roy E. Disney suggested a new character similar to the clumsy albatross. Considering that Orville shares the same name as one of the Wright brothers, why not give him a brother named Wilbur? He would be about the same as Orville, but now voiced by John Candy.
Kids should be free. Free to run wild through the house on Saturday mornings. Free to have cookies and milk and get those little white mustaches. You know, nobody's gonna take a kid's freedom away while I'm around. Nobody, you hear me?
While common for the animation process, the team did some extensive research to develop the feature and its look. This time, however, the amount needed and used was larger than ever. They had to take several trips like in the Australian outback and at the San Diego Zoo to study the local animals, analyze the actors as they record their lines, along with watching Dr. Strangelove to research George C. Scott to animate McLeach, which Scott is the voice, and Glen Keane loaned a stuffed American eagle and an eagle skeleton to help him animate Marahute. The animators even got some additional help from a new team of animators established in Orlando, Florida. When Walt Disney World's third theme park, Disney's MGM Studios, opened in 1989, one of the opening attractions was the magic of Disney animation, a tour that presented guests how animation was created and went even further to show people how it's done by also being a fully functioning animation studio. They started off by producing some Roger Rabbit cartoons, but they were also meant to help speed up production on their feature films by providing an extra hand from the 70 artists there, like for the ink and paint job on The Little Mermaid and about 10 minutes of Down Under. But while The Little Mermaid is often significantly noted to start a new chapter in Disney's history, The Rescuers Down Under is actually a landmark feature in the development of animation. During production, the company invested $10 million on the Computer Animation Production System, or CAPS for short, that was developed at a small studio that experimented with computer animation called Pixar. The system was built to replace the traditional process of making cells by digitally producing the ink and paint on the drawings and to put it all together for the final film. They experimented with it on The Little Mermaid during one of the final shots, but Down Under was the first movie to be fully made with CAPS, making The Rescuers Down Under the first ever fully digital feature, and The Little Mermaid the last Disney animated film that used traditional hand-painted cells. However, transitioning to computer to recreate the magic that was done before with cells and the multiplane camera was certainly no easy task. Along with collaborating with Pixar to include some CGI, the animators worked tirelessly and stressfully with the new system to simultaneously learn how it looks and use those new techniques to make the movie look good without passing the deadline. When the film was released on November 16, 1990, along with the new Mickey Mouse short, The Prince and the Pauper, Bianca and Bernard's second mission was a failure. On its opening weekend, it started off in 4th place with $3.5 million, prompting Jeffrey Katzenberg to pull the plug on all the movie's TV advertising, resulting the film to only get $27.9 million domestically and a worldwide total of $47.4 million. As for how critics felt about the movie, they expressed a lot of mixed feelings. They certainly loved the animation and production value that presented some beautiful action and flight scenes, but the rest, like the story and how Australia was represented, was pretty lacking. Since then, The Rescuers received some of the Black Cauldron treatment from Disney, where both movies are mostly being ignored by the company. But to be fair, the case of The Rescuers is not as bad as Cauldron's, and even Down Under eventually gathered a bit of its own fan base, where some even state that the movie is better than its predecessor. I mean, unlike Cauldron, at least they got a Blu-ray release. But for the team that made the feature, the failure was heartbreaking. But as Jeffrey Katzenberg said to Schumacher over the phone about the results, it's okay. We're gonna move forward and we'll do something else. We'll start again tomorrow. The next day, while some were disappointed by the results of Down Under, they knew they still had a job to do to not make that same mistake again with their next feature. They did return to their classic musical formula, but the ambition was higher than ever to create their own adaptation of the tale as old as time, Beauty and the Beast. It's the story of Belle, a girl from a French village who wanted a more exciting life than what she's getting from that small provincial town. When her father went missing, she finds him in a dark castle that is inhabited by a threatening beast and living objects, who are actually people that were cursed that could only be broken if the beast can learn to fall in love, and for that other person to love him in return with a rose whose fallen petals act as a timer. As Belle replaces her father as the beast's prisoner in the castle, they must now do whatever they can to have Belle and the beast fall in love before the final petal falls. While this is a story that's been told through many centuries and in many cultures, it's actually one that's not as easy as it seems to tell effectively. In fact, it's a challenge that not even Walt Disney himself could accomplish. During both the 1930s and 1950s, he and his team tried several attempts to make their own animated adaptation of the Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont tale, but all failed to meet Walt's satisfaction. Some even say that he gave up on the whole idea when he thought he could never top the 1946 film by Jean Cocteau. Fast forwarding to 1987, the studio became more open to making fairy tale movies again after greenlighting The Little Mermaid, and decided to revive the Beauty and the Beast project to the animation team in London, England, where they were working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit at the time. Originally, they wanted Roger Rabbit's animation director, Richard Williams, to be the director of the feature, but passed on the offer because he'd rather work on his decades-long passion project, The Thief and the Cobbler. However, Williams was kind enough to recommend another prominent English animator, Richard Purdom, to take the project. And so, Purdom and the Disney team at London, which included Glen Keane, Andreas Deja, and Tom Cito, began to work on a version of the tale that originally wasn't a musical and was also darker. After 6 months of development, the crew managed to start off with a story reel of the first 20 minutes of the movie, and showed it off to Jeffery Katzenberg, which he ended up not really liking it. And by not liking it, I mean completely scrap all the work they've done and start all over again. Eventually, a few months later, Purdom knew Disney would never go with his version of the story and ultimately quit the project. It was tough for the executives to find a new director, but they managed to have their answer in the form of two story artists, Kirk Wise and Gary Truesdale. It was quite sudden for them to have them direct their first movie, since they were fresh out of directing the animated scenes for the Epcot attraction Cranium Command. At the same time, Jeffery brought in the Little Mermaid's music duo, Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, to turn the movie into a musical. As the London team now moved to Fishkill, New York to work closer with Ashman at his home, they all planned how to expand the story so that it wouldn't literally just be Beauty and the Beast. They included objects that came to life that would act like the sidekicks and comic reliefs, and a villain that went from being a high-class, pompous dandy to a muscle-bound, handsome yet cold-hearted brute named Gaston. However, one fact about Howard that not many people know about is that when he was passionate about something, you didn't want to be in a position to tell him otherwise. The directors had to learn that the hard way when Ashman thought about a tragic opening that showed how the prince was cursed and turned into a beast. For Wise and Truesdale, they cannot take the idea of starting the movie off with an angry little brat turning into a monster seriously. So when they confronted Howard about his idea,
the backstory's
let's just say that it was the last time anyone ever confronted him on an idea of his. While his opening did end up in the final film, it was told differently through a narrator showing stained glass window images. But Howard wasn't the only person that the crew had to face some tough arguments. In a move that was considered unusual for an animated production, Katzenberg hired outsider Linda Wolverton to write the screenplay. Since she was new to the animation process, she didn't understand why the story artist changed many of her words and scenes, which caused a lot of clashes between her and the crew, especially the head of story, Roger Allers. However, when working closer with the crew, she got the hang of it and her relationship with the team significantly improved. But on the bright side, an old familiar face returned during Beauty and the Beast's production to work on Disney's new stories after leaving the company 50 years prior. And that was one of Walt's original character designers and story artists, Joe Grant. When casting Belle, around 500 actresses auditioned, hoping to be the next Disney princess. But the one who ultimately got the part was Paige O'Hara, whose singing was reminiscent to the actress the character was modeled after, Judy Garland, and noted that Ashman was a big fan of her performance in Showboat. During the animation process, the animators were in a bit of a time crunch and only had 2 years to complete the feature, since they already lost a good amount of their time with Per Diem. This was why they needed the help of the Florida team even more to complete some scenes and animate the Be Our Guest number. They even had to resort to recycling animation from Sleeping Beauty for the final shot of the film to buy some time. As the characters went through several different designs before settling with their final look for the movie, the one who went through the most changes and who's said to be the toughest to pull off was the Beast. The challenge was to make him look like a threatening monster, but could also be convincing that he has a caring soul on the inside, and that the Beauty and the audience would eventually end up falling in love with him. Glen Keane took on the task, and after experimenting with numerous of animals to fit the character, he found inspiration from his taxidermized buffalo head to mix several animals for his design, containing the mane of a lion, the beard and head of a buffalo, the brow of a gorilla, the tusk of a wild boar, the body of a bear, the legs and tail of a wolf, and most importantly, the eyes of a human to show who he truly is underneath all that fur and rage. Now that the animators got more familiar with Caps after Down Under, they decided to try out some of the new tricks it could do that were once considered impossible with the traditional process. The best example is how it blended CGI with hand-drawn characters to a much stronger effect, which was used in the shot where Belle and the Beast dance in the computer-generated ballroom as the camera moves around them to give the illusion of 3D space. The result turned out to be one of the most memorable shots of the picture, and it even convinced the executives that computer animation can have some strong potential in the future. On the night of the Oscars in 1990, when Ashman and Menken won for Best Score and Best Song for The Little Mermaid, Howard privately revealed to Alan that he was HIV positive. Of course, word eventually got to the people at Disney, and this was why some of the team moved to Fishkill so that they could directly work with Howard while his health was rapidly deteriorating. Inevitably, on March 14, 1991, Howard Ashman passed away. Before his death, some of the crew, including producer Don Hahn, all visited him at St. Vincent's Hospital, and they were sharing how they just came out of a great time with the press and a test screening to show how all their hard work paid off very well. Before saying his final goodbye, Hahn told him that it was going to be a great success. Who would have thought of it? And Howard replied, "I would." During the credits of the film, a tribute was placed in his honor that says, "To our friend Howard, who gave a mermaid her voice and a beast his soul. We will be forever grateful." Near its release, the company decided to make a major gamble by showing an unfinished version of the movie, which then, around 70% of the animation was complete, at the New York Film Festival. At the time, the team thought it was insane, and during the screening, it was one of the most stressful moments of their lives. But when the movie reached the end, the New York crowd burst into a standing ovation, something that no one thought would ever happen for an animated film, let alone one that wasn't even finished. And by the time the film was officially released a few months later on November 22nd, 1991, it immediately became legendary. It was one of the most critically acclaimed films from Disney, where critics said that it's up in the same leagues as Walt's greatest classics like Snow White, Pinocchio, and Fantasia. And at the box office, it made history as the first animated film to cross $100 million in North America and the third highest grossing film domestically of 1991 behind Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, resulting in a domestic total of $145.9 million and $331.9 million worldwide. But the rewards don't end there. The pop version of the song Beauty and the Beast, sung by Peebo Bryson and Celine Dion, became a great commercial hit and was credited to launch the international success of Dion. When it was time for awards season, the movie was so much of a prominent name that it ended up making history once again, receiving numerous of nominations and wins, like earning 5 Grammys, 2 Annies, and 3 Golden Globes, including Best Picture in the comedy or musical category. But the movie's biggest award achievement was at the Oscars, where it won 2 for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for Beauty and the Beast, and got 4 nominations that include 2 additional Best Songs for Belle and Be Our Guest, Best Sound, and the biggest of them all, Best Picture. While it lost to Silence of the Lambs, getting that nomination alone was an amazing accomplishment, as it makes Beauty and the Beast the first ever animated film in history to receive an Academy Award nomination for Best Picture. But Beauty and the Beast's history-changing impact are not from the movie alone. In 1994, Disney used the movie as their source for their first Broadway stage musical. And while it wasn't as critically cherished as the film, it was a great success by playing almost 5,500 performances in 13 years, making it, as of 2020, the 10th longest running show in Broadway history. Following the footsteps of The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast also helped Disney by growing its own brand of merchandising, attractions at the parks, and several spin-offs and follow-ups, including the live-action series Sing Me a Story with Belle in 1995 that had 26 episodes, and 2 direct-to-video sequels, which are The Enchanted Christmas in 1997 and Belle's Magical World in 1998. In 2017, Disney released a live-action remake of the film with Bill Condon as the director and an all-star cast that consisted of Emma Watson, Dan Stevens, Luke Evans, Josh Gad, and many more. Similarly to the Broadway show, the film did not receive the same kind of positive reviews from critics. In fact, even audiences grew to detest the remake. But it did become the second highest grossing film of that year, making a massive $1.26 billion at the box office, along with getting 2 Oscar nominations. But no matter how successful that feature was, not even that can overshadow the influence and the power of the original, where it also returned to the big screen with a few different versions. The first was in 2002 with a special edition IMAX version that included a previously deleted song, Human Again, and a 3D version in 2012, growing its box office total to $440 million. Around the same time, Beauty and the Beast continuously appeared on numerous of lists of the best animated films of all time, including several from the American Film Institute, like at number 62 with the song Beauty and the Beast on their top 100 songs, number 34 on their top 100 passions or love stories, number 22 on their top 100 movie musicals, and at number 7 on their top 10 animated films, along with being added to the National Film Registry in 2002. What was once considered to be an impossible task that not even Walt Disney could accomplish is now a monumental milestone created successfully by the new animators. Not only did this become the definitive movie version of The Tale as Old as Time, but it is also acclaimed as one of the greatest and most important animated features in history. With the success of both this film and The Little Mermaid, they confirmed to the public that Disney has entered a new golden era of their animated films. A renaissance where each feature is a major motion picture event to witness the next unforgettable classic, and that the Disney brand is now associated with producing current cinematic masterpieces. The animators may think it couldn't get better than this, but it wouldn't be too long that they would be the kings of animation.